I sat at the head of a polished walnut dining table that reflected the chandelier like still water. Crystal glasses caught the warm light, expensive silverware rested beside untouched plates, and the scent of rosemary and butter drifted through the room. Anyone looking through the windows would have thought they were seeing a family celebrating success. I knew better. By the time dessert arrived, I already understood that the invitation had never been about family. It was about control. My name is Maya Brooks. I built my consulting firm one client, one contract, and one impossible week at a time. Nothing had been handed to me. Every milestone came after another closed door, another meeting where people assumed I was the assistant instead of the executive, another reminder that my darker skin somehow made me less impressive than everyone else in the room. My father had never said those words directly. He never needed to. His silence did the job. He lifted his wine glass with a confident smile that usually meant someone else was about to lose something. "I have exciting news," he announced. Everyone looked toward him. My younger brother, Adrian, leaned back comfortably, already smiling as though he had heard the speech before. "I've spent months speaking with investors," my father continued. "They've committed $2,480,000 to expand Adrian's company." Applause circled the table. My mother reached across to squeeze Adrian's hand. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. Then my father looked directly at me. "The investors believe combining your consulting firm with Adrian's company will create a stronger brand. It only makes sense for you to transfer your client portfolio." The room became strangely quiet. Even the soft jazz playing through hidden speakers seemed farther away. He wasn't asking. He was announcing a decision he believed had already been accepted. Adrian smiled. "It'll be easier for everyone," he said. "You won't have to carry everything yourself anymore." I folded my hands together. I don't remember agreeing to that. My father laughed softly. "You don't need to make this difficult." My mother finally joined the conversation. "Maya, family comes first." Those 4 words had followed me since childhood. Family comes first. Unless I won the award. Unless I earned the promotion. Unless I accomplished something my brother hadn't. Then suddenly there was always another reason why my success should belong to everyone else. I looked around the table. Nobody questioned the announcement. Nobody asked what would happen to my employees. Nobody wondered whether my clients had a choice. They had already decided that sacrificing my company was simply another contribution I should make for the family. I took a slow sip of water.
Cool. Steady.
Controlled. Inside, I felt something much colder than anger. Clarity. Adrian leaned toward me with the confidence of someone who believed victory had already been signed. "You'll still have an executive title," he said. "Think of it as a promotion." I almost smiled.
A promotion.
To work inside the company built on top of mine. What an interesting definition. Across the table, my mother watched me carefully. "Say something." "I am thinking." My father nodded as though my silence confirmed his authority. "That's wise." They interpreted my calm as surrender. They thought they were watching the strongest woman in the room finally accept defeat. They had absolutely no idea what had already happened months before that dinner. Because while everyone else had been planning tonight's announcement, I had been planning something entirely different. I remembered the afternoon when I quietly moved critical business assets into a separate holding structure after noticing unusual questions about my contracts. No one in my family knew those documents existed. No one had asked why I suddenly became less interested in discussing company finances during Sunday dinners. They assumed I was distracted. I was preparing. Preparation often looks like silence. That is why people underestimate it. My father pushed a folder toward me. "I've already had the paperwork drafted." I glanced at the cover. Merger proposal. The document looked professional, expensive, confident. It also assumed I had no leverage. I closed the folder without opening it. I'll have my attorney review everything. Adrian chuckled. Still don't trust your own family? I met his eyes. I trust paperwork more than promises. Nobody laughed. For a brief second, something shifted.
Not enough for them to stop.
Just enough for uncertainty to appear. Then my father dismissed it with another confident smile. The investors are expecting an answer by Monday. I understand. You'll do the right thing. I always do. He heard obedience. I meant something completely different. Dinner ended with photographs, forced smiles, and expensive champagne. Everyone celebrated a future they believed was guaranteed. I walked outside into the cool evening air, letting the silence replace the noise behind me. The city lights stretched across the horizon like quiet promises. I took one slow breath, then another. They believed they had cornered me. They believed my dream depended on their approval. They believed they had already buried my future. But they had absolutely no idea the funeral belonged to someone else. The daughter they never chose. The morning after that dinner, I arrived at my office before sunrise. The building was quiet except for the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic waking across the city. I placed my briefcase on the conference table, poured a cup of black coffee, and stared through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The skyline had always reminded me that success belonged to those willing to outlast disappointment. Disappointment was something I knew well. My family liked telling people I had always been independent. The truth sounded very different. I became independent because I learned early that depending on them always came with conditions. Growing up, my younger brother Adrian never had to earn the same praise I fought for. His lighter skin, charming smile, and effortless confidence made every room welcome him before he even spoke. Family friends called him handsome. Church members predicted he would become a leader. My father repeated those compliments until they sounded like facts. When I brought home perfect grades, my father nodded once. "Good," he would say. When Adrian finished second in a local business competition years later, my father organized a celebration dinner. "He has natural leadership," he proudly announced. I congratulated my brother because I truly loved him then. I believed families eventually became fair. They didn't. As the years passed, every accomplishment I earned somehow became less impressive than his potential. When I graduated at the top of my class, my father reminded everyone that Adrian would probably earn more money. When I launched my consulting firm, my mother smiled politely before asking whether I could help Adrian build his own business. When my company signed its first seven-figure contract, they barely mentioned it during Sunday dinner. But when Adrian leased a luxury office he could barely afford, my parents toasted his vision. I noticed the pattern long before I understood the reason. Colorism lived quietly inside our family. Nobody discussed it openly. Nobody admitted it existed. It simply shaped expectations without asking permission. I learned to stop searching their faces for approval because I never found it there. Instead, I found it in my work. Clients judged results. Contracts rewarded preparation. Balance sheets never cared about skin tone. That fairness became my refuge. Unfortunately, my family viewed my independence as defiance. Whenever I questioned an unfair decision, my mother repeated the same sentence. Family comes before being right. At first, those words sounded comforting. Eventually, I understood their real meaning. Loyalty always flowed in one direction. Toward Adrian. Never toward me. 3 days after the family dinner, Strange emails began arriving from longtime clients. One postponed a renewal meeting. Another asked unexpected questions about my company's financial stability. A third requested confirmation that rumors about an upcoming merger were accurate. I leaned back in my chair. Rumors. Someone had started talking. By Friday afternoon, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Two prospective clients canceled presentations without explanation. Another delayed signing a consulting agreement worth nearly $410,000. None of them sounded angry. They sounded uncertain. Uncertainty destroys businesses much faster than open conflict. I instructed my operations director to document every unusual communication.
No assumptions.
Only facts. By Monday morning, another name entered the picture. Richard Caldwell. He appeared polished, articulate, and effortlessly confident. Magazine profiles described him as a visionary entrepreneur who specialized in corporate acquisitions. His interviews emphasized innovation, leadership, and integrity. He looked exactly like the kind of executive investors trusted immediately. Adrian admired him. My father admired him even more. At another family gathering, my father introduced Richard with unmistakable pride. Maya, this is the man helping Adrian build something extraordinary. Richard extended his hand. I've heard impressive things about you. His smile never reached his eyes. So have I replied. He chuckled softly. I hope we'll have opportunities to collaborate. I only collaborate when interests truly align. His expression barely changed. Smart answer. The conversation moved on, but something stayed with me. His compliments sounded rehearsed. His confidence felt manufactured. Most experienced executives reveal themselves through curiosity. Richard revealed himself through performance. That difference mattered. Over the following weeks, more clients mentioned hearing concerns about my leadership. Someone suggested I struggled with major accounts. Someone implied my company lacked sufficient capital. Someone questioned whether key employees planned to resign. Every rumor carried just enough uncertainty to avoid legal liability. Professionally executed. Strategically timed.
Difficult to trace. They thought they were protecting themselves.
What they didn't know was that patterns often speak louder than individual statements. I refused to chase gossip. Instead, I documented dates, names, and conversations. Emotion never survives inside a courtroom. Evidence does. One evening, after reviewing another canceled proposal, I walked into the underground parking garage carrying a folder full of notes. The concrete walls echoed every footstep. Cool air drifted through the nearly empty structure. As I unlocked my car, an older gentleman approached from the neighboring elevator. I recognized him immediately. Charles Whitmore, a retired corporate attorney whose reputation had shaped billion-dollar mergers long before I opened my first office. He had occasionally attended industry conferences where we exchanged brief conversations. He stopped beside me. I've been watching. I remained quiet. He looked directly at me with calm, experienced eyes. They're moving faster than they should. I nodded once. So I've noticed. He smiled gently. The hardest lesson in corporate litigation is learning when silence creates more value than argument. I waited. Then he gave me advice that would change everything. Don't defend yourself yet, he said quietly. Let them finish making their mistake. When my world finally broke, Monday mornings used to bring opportunity. That Monday brought silence. I walked into my office at exactly 7:15 a.m., balancing a cup of coffee while reviewing the week's calendar on my tablet. The reception area, once filled with early client meetings and cheerful conversations, felt strangely hollow. Even the familiar clicking of keyboards sounded cautious, as though everyone sensed a storm approaching but couldn't yet see the clouds. By 8:03 a.m., my assistant appeared outside my office. She knocked gently. "Maya, our meeting with Harrison Medical Group has been canceled." I looked up from my laptop. "They didn't ask to reschedule?" She slowly shook her head. "They said they've decided to move in another direction." I nodded once. "Thank you." She lingered for a moment before quietly closing the door. I stared at the calendar. That contract alone represented nearly $615,000 in annual consulting revenue. Losing one client could be explained. Losing several within days rarely happened by accident. At 9:40 a.m., another email arrived. The subject line contained only 3 words: Notice of termination. A manufacturing client I had worked beside for almost 6 years informed me they were ending our agreement immediately. The message sounded strangely formal, almost rehearsed.
No plans. No explanation.
Simply gratitude for previous services and a notice that our relationship had ended. I leaned back in my chair. The coffee beside me had already turned cold. By lunchtime, 3 additional clients postponed negotiations indefinitely. Each conversation followed the same pattern: careful words, uncomfortable pauses. Someone had spoken to them before I ever had the chance. They had absolutely no idea they were repeating someone else's script. I opened a spreadsheet and began documenting everything: client names,
Times. Dates.
language patterns.
No emotion.
Only evidence. Emotion clouds judgment. Documentation sharpens it. The following morning brought another surprise. At exactly 10:12 a.m., my relationship manager from First Federal Commercial Bank requested an urgent meeting. His voice sounded unusually restrained. When I arrived, he avoided eye contact while sliding a folder across the polished conference table. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Our credit committee has suspended approval of your expansion financing." I remained still. The application was already approved last month.
It was.
What changed? He hesitated. Additional concerns were submitted during the final review. What concerns? I'm not authorized to discuss confidential communications. I studied his expression. He looked embarrassed. Not hostile. Embarrassed people usually know more than they can legally say. "I appreciate your honesty," I replied. "I truly am sorry."
So am I.
Outside the bank, cool autumn wind rushed between downtown buildings. I tightened my coat and watched people hurry through their ordinary mornings, completely unaware that my future had shifted in less than 24 hours. They thought they were winning. What they didn't know was that desperation often causes careless mistakes. Unfortunately, I wasn't ready to see that yet. 2 days later, another blow arrived. A certified letter waited on my desk. The envelope carried the seal of a state regulatory agency. Inside was a formal notification acknowledging anonymous allegations concerning my company's business practices. No findings.
No accusations.
Only confirmation that complaints had been received and preliminary inquiries would begin. Strategic. Designed to consume time, money, and credibility. My legal counsel reviewed the notice before looking back at me. This happens more often than people realize. "You think someone coordinated this?" He carefully chose his words. "I think someone wants you distracted." That answer stayed with me long after the meeting ended. Over the next 3 weeks, everything accelerated. Revenue projections dropped. Expansion plans froze. Recruitment efforts stopped. Employees whispered outside conference rooms before becoming silent whenever I approached. No one blamed me, but uncertainty had entered the building. Uncertainty spreads faster than facts. Every evening I left later than everyone else. I refused to let my staff see exhaustion on my face. Leadership required consistency, especially when confidence felt expensive. Then came Thursday, the day everything finally became too heavy. At 8:47 p.m., the office stood almost empty. Only emergency lights illuminated the hallways, casting long reflections across the polished floors. The air conditioning hummed steadily while rain tapped softly against the windows overlooking the city. I walked through departments that had once buzzed with ambition. Empty desks, dark computer screens, half-finished coffee mugs, whiteboards still covered with ideas for projects that might never happen. I returned to my office and quietly closed the door. For several minutes, I simply stood there.
Still, silent.
My reflection stared back from the black glass windows. Strong posture, professional suit, composed expression. It looked convincing. Until I sat down. Something inside me finally gave way. For the first time since building my company, I cried without trying to stop myself. Not because of lost money, not because of damaged reputation, because I had trusted people who celebrated every wound they created. The tears came quietly.
No shouting, no anger.
Only grief. I covered my face with both hands while the city lights blurred beyond the windows. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Eventually the room became completely silent again. That silence changed everything. I stopped asking myself one question.
Why?
Why would my family betray me? Why would Adrian allow this? Why would my parents watch it happen? None of those questions could rebuild my future. Instead, another question slowly replaced them.
How?
How had they coordinated everything so quickly? How did the same rumors reach unrelated clients? How did financing disappear almost overnight? How did anonymous complaints arrive with perfect timing? The moment I asked how instead of why, I felt something shift inside me. The pain remained, but it no longer controlled me. Hopeful entrepreneurs chase approval. Strategists study patterns. That lonely office became the place where the hopeful version of me quietly disappeared. Another version emerged. Patient, observant, unemotional, prepared to wait as long as necessary. A gentle knock interrupted my thoughts. I wiped my face before answering.
Come in.
The door opened slowly. Charles Whitmore stepped inside, carrying a sealed manila envelope beneath his arm. He looked at me for only a moment before placing it carefully on my desk. I was hoping you'd reach this point tonight, he said. I glanced at the envelope. No return address. It doesn't need one. The room fell silent again. Then he pushed the envelope toward me. Open it. My hands hesitated only briefly before breaking the seal. Inside rested a legal trust agreement that nobody else knew existed. The backup plan they could never imagine. I stared at the legal trust agreement for several seconds before looking back at Charles Whitmore. The paper felt heavier than its weight suggested, as though years of hidden decisions rested between its pages. Outside my office, rain continued tapping against the windows, but inside the room everything had become strangely still. What is this? I asked quietly. Charles removed his glasses and folded them carefully. It is your grandfather's final business decision. I looked down again. The document carried authentic notarizations, trust registration numbers, and signatures that had been executed more than 8 years earlier. Every page reflected meticulous legal drafting. Whoever prepared it understood corporate law, at the highest level. My grandfather never mentioned this. He wasn't supposed to. Charles sat across from me before continuing. He believed timing mattered more than explanation. I slowly turned another page. The trust owned controlling interests in 3 commercial office properties located in the city's financial district. Combined, they generated substantial annual lease income through long-term commercial tenants. The ownership structure had been intentionally layered beneath holding companies, making public discovery extremely difficult. I felt my pulse slow instead of quicken. For weeks I had reacted to crisis. Now I was looking at structure, strategy, protection. My grandfather created all of this? Charles nodded. He built wealth quietly because he understood something your father never did. What was that? Real power doesn't announce itself. His words settled over me like calm after a storm. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't thinking about everything I had lost. I was thinking about everything my enemies didn't know. Charles opened another folder and slid several documents toward me. There's more. Inside were lease agreements, corporate correspondence, archived emails, and financial statements dating back several years. Every document had been organized chronologically, complete with handwritten notes from my grandfather's legal advisors. I spent nearly an hour reviewing them. Patterns slowly emerged. One company name appeared repeatedly. Caldwell Strategic Ventures. Richard Caldwell's company. The polished entrepreneur my father admired. The executive investors trusted. The man who smiled too easily. What am I looking at? I asked. Charles folded his hands. Failed due diligence. I raised my eyes. He approached your grandfather years ago seeking investment partnerships. Your grandfather declined.
Why?
Because the numbers never matched the promises. I continued reading. Internal memoranda documented inflated property valuations. Emails referenced shell companies receiving consulting fees with no measurable services. Several investment summaries listed projected returns unsupported by audited financial statements. Nothing alone proved fraud. Together, they revealed something far more dangerous. A pattern. My grandfather hadn't accused Richard Caldwell of criminal conduct. He had simply refused to do business with him. He kept all of this. He believed one day someone might need it. I quietly closed the folder. They had absolutely no idea. Charles smiled.
No.
They assumed history began the day they entered your life. The following morning, I arrived at my office before sunrise once again. This time I wasn't overwhelmed. I had a plan. Not revenge. Preparation. The first call I made wasn't to my family. It wasn't to the media. It wasn't even to my attorneys. Instead, I contacted one of the country's most respected forensic accounting firms. By noon, confidentiality agreements had been signed. Their assignment was simple. Review every financial interaction connected to Richard Caldwell, Adrian's expanding company, and every suspicious event surrounding my business. Only evidence. Nothing else. Later that afternoon, Charles introduced me to a private investigations firm specializing in corporate misconduct. Former federal investigators, financial analysts, digital forensic specialists, professionals who understood patients better than publicity. We don't chase headlines, their director explained. We follow documentation. That's exactly what I need. Within days, another confidential engagement letter was executed. Every communication remained protected by attorney-client privilege whenever applicable. Every invoice traveled through the trust's legal structure rather than my consulting company. Nothing pointed back to me. Nothing attracted attention. While investigators quietly assembled timelines, I retained one of the nation's most respected commercial litigation firms. Walking into their offices felt different from every meeting I'd attended over the previous month. No one questioned my credibility. No one pitied me. The senior partner listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked only one question. Can you remain patient?
Yes.
Even if they continue attacking you?
I can.
He leaned back.
Good.
Litigation rewards discipline more than emotion. Exactly what Charles had been teaching me. Exactly what my grandfather had planned. Over the following weeks, my role became surprisingly small. I reviewed reports, approved investigative budgets, answered legal questions. Then I waited. Waiting became its own form of strength. Every attack against my reputation continued. Anonymous complaints surfaced. Rumors spread.
Prospective client disappeared.
My father publicly praised Adrian's rapid business growth during networking events. My mother continued telling relatives that I simply needed to support my younger brother instead of competing with him. Richard Caldwell appeared in business magazines discussing ethics, innovation, and responsible leadership. The irony almost made me smile. They thought silence meant surrender. What they didn't know was that silence often creates the safest space for arrogance. And arrogance leaves fingerprints. Every week, new evidence quietly entered secure legal files. Emails, contract amendments, wire transfer records, board meeting minutes, vendor agreements. Each document seemed insignificant alone. Together, they formed something impossible to ignore. Then, one afternoon, our forensic accountants discovered something unexpected. Several agreements involving Adrian's company referenced commercial properties partially controlled by entities inside my grandfather's trust. I frowned. That can't be right. The accountant adjusted his glasses. They apparently relied on publicly available summaries rather than reviewing complete ownership records. I looked at Charles. Understanding crossed his face immediately. They never performed full title verification, which meant they had executed agreements containing representations they legally couldn't guarantee, because they never realized who actually controlled those assets.
Me.
Every aggressive move they made after that only deepened their exposure. Every misleading statement expanded potential liability. Every signature strengthened the documentary trail. They believed they were tightening a noose around my future. Instead, they were tying knots around their own. I never celebrated. Premature confidence destroys careful strategy. I simply kept reading every report that arrived on my desk. Every page confirmed the same truth. I didn't need to destroy anyone. Facts would do that without my help. Late one evening, after reviewing another stack of verified financial records, I closed the final folder and looked toward the city lights glowing beyond my office windows. For weeks I had believed my greatest weapon would be anger. I was wrong. The evidence wasn't my revenge. Their signatures were. The conference room overlooked the city from the 42nd floor, where walls of glass reflected gray morning clouds and rows of polished oak tables formed a quiet battlefield. Every chair was occupied long before I arrived. Investors spoke in low voices. Corporate attorneys reviewed thick binders. Financial analysts whispered over spreadsheets. Cameras from several business news outlets waited near the back of the room, though no one expected drama. They expected another executive dispute. I knew they were about to witness something very different. At exactly 9 a.m., the doors opened behind me. I stepped inside wearing a tailored black suit with a crisp white blouse and simple pearl earrings. The outfit wasn't chosen to impress anyone. It reminded me of something my grandfather once told me before my first internship. Dress for the responsibility you carry, not the approval you seek. Every step across the hardwood floor felt steady. Months earlier, I would have entered hoping someone believed me. Now, I only cared whether the evidence spoke clearly. Across the room sat my father, my mother, and Adrian. My father looked confident, though the smile he wore at family dinners had become noticeably smaller. My mother clasped her hands tightly in her lap, avoiding my eyes. Adrian adjusted his expensive watch every few seconds, pretending calm while betraying anxiety through tiny movements. Richard Caldwell stood near the front, greeting investors with effortless charm.
He smiled when he saw me.
I wasn't sure you'd actually come. I received the invitation, I answered. He laughed quietly.
Good.
It'll save everyone time. His confidence filled the room. He believed appearance mattered more than preparation. That assumption had carried him through most of his career. Today it would become his greatest weakness. The presiding arbitrator welcomed everyone and outlined the purpose of the emergency hearing. Allegations involving fiduciary responsibilities, investor disclosures, corporate governance, and contractual obligations had reached a level requiring immediate review. Formal introductions ended. Richard stood first. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, these accusations are nothing more than an emotional response from someone unable to accept healthy competition. Several people nodded politely. He continued, my company has operated with complete transparency. Every investment has been properly disclosed, every agreement professionally executed, and every decision made in the best interests of our shareholders. His delivery sounded practiced, confident, almost flawless. Then he looked directly at me. Unfortunately, not everyone succeeds in business. Sometimes failure creates resentment. He smiled again. I truly hope Ms. Brooks eventually finds peace with that reality. The room remained quiet. Months earlier those words might have provoked me. Now they simply confirmed what I already knew. People often reveal the most when they believe they are untouchable. My lead attorney rose slowly. If the panel permits, we'd like to begin presenting documentary evidence. Permission was granted. The first screen illuminated with corporate filings. Then came certified property records. Next were board resolutions. Wire transfer summaries followed. Each exhibit connected to another through dates, signatures, and financial transactions.
No dramatic speeches. No emotion like questions.
Only documentation. My attorney spoke calmly. Exhibit 12 demonstrates ownership interests inconsistent with representations made to investors. Another screen appeared. Exhibit 18 compares sworn declarations with subsequent financial disclosures. The atmosphere shifted. Pens stopped moving. Whispers disappeared. Richard leaned forward for the first time. His smile faded. He requested permission to respond immediately. Granted. These documents are being taken out of context, he insisted. Our legal team can explain every transaction. One of the arbitrators asked quietly, which explanation would you like us to consider? Richard frowned. The consulting agreements. My attorney nodded. Very well. Another document appeared. This agreement contains your signature. It does. And paragraph 14 acknowledges beneficial ownership verification before execution. Richard hesitated. I relied on representations provided by others. Another exhibit appeared. This one included an email bearing his digital signature. The timestamp preceded the contract by several weeks. It confirmed he had personally reviewed ownership questions. Silence settled over the room. Richard spoke again, trying to recover. I don't specifically remember that communication. A forensic technology specialist stood. The metadata confirms the document originated from Mr. Caldwell's executive account. Another pause. The investors exchanged uneasy glances. Adrian shifted in his chair. My father slowly removed his glasses. The confidence surrounding our family table months earlier had vanished. Yet no one had raised their voice. The evidence didn't need emotion. It carried its own weight. Richard tried another approach. This entire matter is a misunderstanding created by incomplete records. My attorney calmly displayed a certified trust document. It appears the records were complete. Richard stared at the screen. His expression changed in ways no rehearsed smile could conceal. For the first time all morning, he looked surprised. Not theatrical. Genuinely surprised. He hadn't known the trust existed. Neither had my father. Neither had Adrian. Everything they believed about my position rested on one fatal assumption, that I owned nothing capable of challenging them. They had built strategy upon ignorance. The consequences belonged to them. Questions continued. Each answer Richard offered created another contradiction with documents already entered into the record. When he claimed limited involvement, emails showed direct participation. When he described independent decisions, meeting minutes placed him at the center of discussions. When he suggested administrative oversight, banking records reflected personal authorization. He wasn't trapped by my accusations. He was trapped by his own history. I remained silent. I didn't interrupt. I didn't celebrate. I simply watched the truth assemble itself. Eventually, the panel requested a brief recess. As people stood, my father finally looked at me. His eyes searched my face for anger. He didn't find it. He found something much harder to understand.
Peace.
Not because everything was over, because I had stopped needing his approval long before that morning. The hearing resumed 20 minutes later. The lead arbitrator looked across the room before speaking in a measured voice. The documentary record is substantial. The panel will continue reviewing all submitted evidence before issuing its findings. He glanced toward both legal teams. Counsel. A brief silence followed. Then he gave a single instruction that changed the mood of the entire room. Proceed. The price of choosing status over family 3 months after the hearing, I returned to the courthouse for what everyone expected to be the final chapter of a story that had begun around my family's dining table. The marble hallways echoed with measured footsteps, quiet conversations, and the soft rustling of legal files. Outside, reporters gathered behind security barriers, waiting for statements that would shape tomorrow's headlines. I had no interest in cameras. I cared about the record. My legal team met me near the courtroom entrance. My lead attorney handed me the final briefing folder. Everything is ready, he said. I nodded once. The evidence held. It did. We walked inside together. The courtroom felt different from the shareholder hearing. There were no confident smiles or polished speeches. Months of litigation had stripped away appearances, leaving only facts, financial records, and sworn testimony. Richard Caldwell sat beside his attorneys. He looked older, not because of time, because certainty had abandoned him. My father occupied the second row with lowered shoulders. The man who once measured success by titles and exclusive board memberships no longer carried himself with effortless authority. My mother sat beside him, quietly twisting a handkerchief between trembling fingers. Adrian stared at the floor, avoiding every familiar face in the room. No one looked victorious. The judge entered precisely at 10 a.m. Everyone stood. After reviewing the procedural history, the judge summarized months of forensic accounting, contract analysis, banking records, and corporate governance findings. Every conclusion rested on evidence, not emotion, not speculation, The courtroom remained silent. Then the judge delivered the ruling. Civil judgment is entered consistent with the findings before this court. Those words changed several lives at once. Court-authorized recovery proceedings immediately froze more than 18,750,000 in corporate and personal assets connected to fraudulent transactions. Receivers were appointed to preserve remaining business operations while independent financial administrators evaluated every outstanding obligation. Richard closed his eyes briefly. His attorneys whispered among themselves, but no strategy could rewrite the documents they had already acknowledged. The numbers never lied. Months earlier, they believed they were building an empire. They had actually documented their own collapse. The judge continued outlining investor protections. Recovered assets would be distributed according to court-approved priority schedules. Pension funds, minority shareholders, and small private investors who had relied on false financial representations would receive substantial reimbursement through the liquidation process. That mattered more to me than any headline. Many of those investors had trusted people wearing expensive suits and confident smiles. Their retirement savings deserved better. The court also approved a supervised restructuring plan for the consulting employees whose jobs had been endangered during the fraudulent expansion. Experienced administrators would oversee payroll continuity, contract transfers, and operational stability, while legitimate business divisions continued serving existing clients. I finally allowed myself a slow breath. The employees who had worried about paying mortgages and supporting their families would not become collateral damage. Justice had protected the innocent before addressing the guilty. That was exactly how it should work. Richard's consequences extended beyond the courtroom. Within weeks, multiple professional organizations suspended or revoked his memberships. Regulatory agencies initiated licensing proceedings based upon the court's findings, and corporate boards quietly removed his name from leadership positions. Business magazines that once celebrated his leadership published corrections instead. Television interviews disappeared. Conference invitations stopped arriving. His reputation had not been destroyed by rumors. It had been dismantled by verified facts. Meanwhile, my father experienced a different kind of downfall. The charitable foundations and corporate boards that had admired his reputation began requesting his resignation. Some cited governance concerns. Others simply thanked him for years of service before announcing new leadership. Prestige had always been his favorite currency. Now it vanished one appointment at a time. Watching him leave the courthouse that afternoon, I realized he looked smaller than I had ever remembered. Not physically. Emotionally. He finally understood that borrowed influence disappears the moment trust leaves the room. My mother approached me several days later. We met quietly in a public garden where autumn leaves drifted across empty pathways. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, she looked at me. I kept asking you to choose family.
You did.
I thought keeping everyone together mattered more than fairness. I listened without interrupting. Tears filled her eyes. I didn't realize I was asking only one child to sacrifice. Those words carried more honesty than anything I had heard from her in years. I didn't answer immediately. Some apologies deserve silence before acceptance. I hope you find peace, I finally said.
So do I.
We parted without anger, without reconciliation, only understanding. Adrian called me the following week. His voice sounded unfamiliar. Not confident, not defensive, just tired. I spent years believing success could be inherited, he admitted. It can't. I know.
I should have built something of my own.
I looked out the window of my office before answering. Respect works the same way. He quietly agreed. That conversation ended without promises. Some lessons arrived too late to restore what was lost. Yet they still matter. People later asked whether I felt satisfied watching everyone fall. The honest answer surprised them.
No.
Satisfaction was never my goal. I never wanted my family to fail. I wanted the truth to survive. There is an important difference. Revenge demands suffering. Integrity demands accountability. What happened afterward was not the product of my anger. It was the consequence of their own decisions, documented in contracts they signed, emails they sent, and financial statements they approved. They believed silence meant weakness. They believed kindness meant surrender. They believed power belonged to those who controlled the loudest voice. They were wrong. In the end, I didn't defeat them with revenge. I outlasted them with patience. Justice didn't destroy them.
Their choices did.
The dream they tried to kill built my legacy. 5 years passed more quickly than I ever imagined.
The calendar changed.
Markets shifted. New businesses rose while others quietly disappeared. Yet every morning, when I unlocked the doors to my headquarters, I remembered the woman who once sat alone in a nearly empty office, believing everything she had built was slipping away. She still lived inside me. She simply no longer carried the same fears. Our company now operated in 12 major cities across the country. Offices that once existed only as handwritten notes in my business journal had become thriving teams serving clients with integrity instead of empty promises. Every new location reminded me that growth built patiently always lasts longer than success borrowed through deception. Walking through our headquarters became my favorite part of every week. Young analysts discussed strategy in conference rooms. Attorneys mentored recent graduates. Consultants collaborated across departments filled with energy, creativity, and purpose. Many of the professionals leading those teams shared something deeply personal with me. They had once been overlooked. Some had been underestimated because of their backgrounds. Others had been told they were too quiet, too ambitious, too inexperienced, or simply not the right fit. Their stories sounded painfully familiar. That was exactly why they belonged here. I wanted every talented young Black professional entering our company to experience something I rarely found early in my career. Opportunity without conditions. Respect without comparison. Leadership without prejudice. One Friday afternoon, I attended the orientation for our newest group of associates. Their excitement filled the auditorium with hopeful conversation and nervous laughter. Looking across those faces, I saw reflections of dreams waiting for someone to believe in them. I stepped to the podium. "Your voice belongs in every room your preparation earns," I told them. "Never let someone else's limited imagination become the ceiling over your future." The room answered with warm applause. Years earlier, I had searched for those words from my own family. Now I could become the person I once needed. Perhaps that was the greatest victory of all. My grandfather's legacy continued growing in ways he probably imagined, but never lived long enough to witness. Every year, our foundation awarded scholarships in his name to students pursuing business, finance, law, and public service. We invested in education because knowledge creates opportunities that no one can easily take away. During every scholarship ceremony, I paused beside his portrait before welcoming each new class of recipients. His quiet wisdom still guided every important decision I made. We also launched community investment initiatives focused on supporting Black-owned businesses, affordable commercial development, and financial education for families, building wealth across generations. I wanted capital to strengthen neighborhoods instead of extracting value from them. Money should create opportunity, not dependency. Watching those businesses open their doors reminded me why I kept moving forward. Success becomes meaningful only when it creates room for someone else to succeed. Occasionally, I would see photographs of my family in local newspapers or community events. Time had changed all of us. My father no longer occupied prestigious boardrooms. My mother carried a softer expression whenever our paths briefly crossed. Adrian eventually started a modest consulting practice built entirely through his own effort. We remained respectful, but distance became our healthiest boundary. Forgiveness arrived quietly. Reconciliation never did. For a long time, I believed those two things had to exist together. I eventually learned they were completely different choices. Forgiveness released the weight I carried. Reconciliation required rebuilt trust. Not everyone earns that privilege, and that realization finally gave me peace. If you're listening to my story today, I want you to remember something that took me years to understand. Some people will mistake your kindness for weakness. Some families will only celebrate you after strangers applaud you. Some doors will close because someone else locked them. Build another entrance anyway. Never allow rejection to become your identity. Never confuse silence with surrender. Never believe another person's approval determines your worth. They plan to destroy my dream because they believe my future depended on their permission. It never did. My backup plan was never just a legal document. It was the decision to keep growing when disappointment invited me to quit. It was choosing patience over panic, integrity over bitterness, purpose over revenge. And if my journey proves anything, it is this. The strongest backup plan isn't hidden in a contract. It is becoming someone no betrayal can ever break.